The alarm screamed at 4:17 a.m., 3 minutes before Regina had set it, as if even time conspired against her rest. She slapped the snooze button with practiced precision, her calloused palm already knowing exactly where to strike in the darkness of her studio apartment. The eviction notice crinkled beneath her elbow as she rolled over. 3 days left, printed in unforgiving red ink that seemed to glow even in the pre-dawn gloom. Her feet hit the cold linoleum with a soft thud that echoed in the hollow space. The refrigerator hummed its empty song, a sound she'd grown to hate. All electricity, no substance. She opened it anyway, a ritual of hope that never delivered. A half-empty carton of milk expired yesterday. Leftover rice from 3 days ago that she couldn't risk eating. A wilted apple that might make it through one more day. My beautiful family, let's start with a blessing. Dear Lord, I ask you to surround every person watching with peace, healing, and endless love. Amen. You are not just an audience. You are my family, the reason I push through on the hardest days. For those who are new here, welcome to the family. Please subscribe, say hello in the comments, and let's grow closer together. Each story I bring is my sacrifice and devotion. When you walk away early, it feels like my heart is left unheard. Please, stay with me through the journey until the very end. I love you always. Now, let us begin. Regina's reflection in the bathroom mirror told the story her smile never would. 28 years old, but her eyes held decades more. Dark circles like bruises that makeup couldn't quite cover. She traced her fingers along her grandmother's necklace, the only thing of value she owned, and the one thing she'd never sell. The small cross caught the bathroom's harsh fluorescent light, casting a shadow across her collarbone that looked like a question mark. Lord, just get me through today, she whispered to the mirror, her voice hoarse from sleep and worry. Just today. The bus ride to Mel's Diner took 43 minutes through the city's awakening arteries. She pressed her face against the cool window and watched the neighborhoods change. From her block's broken streetlights and barred windows to the gradual improvement that meant she was heading toward where people had choices. Her phone buzzed, a text from Dr. Martinez about Grandma Rose's medication costs. Another number she couldn't bear to calculate. Mel's Diner sat on the corner like a faithful dog, weathered, humble, but always there. The neon sign flickered its pink welcome, missing the R in diner, so it just said die. Regina had always found that grimly appropriate. She tied her apron with the muscle memory of someone who'd been serving others since she was 16, fingers working the knots while her mind was already calculating tips, tables, and the delicate mathematics of survival. Across the street, Alex Richardson sat in his Tesla Model S, the leather seats adjusted to the exact specifications programmed into the car's memory. He'd been sitting there for 20 minutes, engine off, watching the diner's windows glow against the morning's grey palette. His phone buzzed insistently, 17 missed calls from his assistant, 43 unread emails, 2 board meetings he was supposed to be preparing for. He let it all buzz into silence. The irony wasn't lost on him. A man worth $2.3 billion, and he spent his sleepless nights parked outside a diner that probably made more in a year than he spent on wine. But here was where real life happened. Here was where people worked because they had to, loved because they chose to, and hoped because the alternative was unthinkable. He'd discovered this place 6 months ago during another bout of insomnia-driven wandering. His penthouse had felt particularly suffocating that night, all glass and steel and expensive emptiness. So he'd driven until he found somewhere that felt inhabited. The diner had drawn him like a moth to flame, or maybe like a hungry child to warmth. Through the window, he could see the waitress, always the same one during these early shifts. She moved with a quiet efficiency that spoke of necessity rather than choice. But there was something else. A gentleness in how she refilled coffee cups, a genuine smile for the construction workers who called her sweetheart, without meaning any harm. Alex had spent enough time around people who performed kindness for his benefit to recognize the real thing when he saw it. His reflection in the Tesla's darkened window showed a man who'd forgotten how to be hungry for anything real. 42 years old, with silver threading through black hair and eyes that his ex-wife once said were beautiful but empty. The expensive watch on his wrist ticked away seconds that felt increasingly meaningless, each one marking time in a life that had everything except what mattered. Alex's phone rang again. His mother, or rather, the woman who'd adopted him when he was 12 and already too broken to trust completely. He let it go to voicemail, already knowing she'd want him to attend some charity function where wealthy people would write checks to feel better about problems they'd never truly understand. The diner's door chimed as an early customer entered. A man in a paint-stained work shirt who probably earned in a month what Alex spent on a single dinner he barely tasted. But that man would go home to a family who'd ask about his day and mean it. He'd sleep the sleep of someone whose work mattered in tangible ways, whose presence was needed rather than simply profitable. Alex's hands gripped the steering wheel, Italian leather soft against his palms. He'd built his empire from nothing, orphan to billionaire. But somewhere along the way, he'd lost the ability to feel genuinely needed by another human being. Every relationship carried the weight of his net worth. Every conversation included calculations about what people wanted from him. The waitress emerged from the diner's back room, and Alex found himself leaning forward slightly. She was tying her apron, and even from this distance, he could see the careful way she moved, economical, purposeful, like someone who couldn't afford wasted energy. There was a story written in her posture, in the way she paused for just a moment before pushing through the swinging doors to start her shift. He'd never spoken to her, never even entered the diner. But he'd watched her serve others with a grace that money couldn't buy, and something about her quiet dignity had begun to haunt his carefully constructed solitude. Alex checked his watch, 6:47 a.m. In 3 hours, he had a meeting that would determine the fate of a company acquisition worth more money than most people could conceptualize. But right now, watching the diner's windows glow with honest light, those billions felt like elaborate abstractions. The only real thing was the way his chest tightened when he thought about driving away, returning to his glass tower, and pretending that connection was something you could purchase like everything else. The diner's bell chimed at 7:23 a.m., but this time the sound carried a different weight. Lighter, more hesitant, like a question being asked instead of a statement being made. Regina looked up from wiping down table 6, her practiced smile already in place, but it faltered when she saw who'd entered. A boy, maybe 8 years old, stood just inside the doorway with his hand still on the glass door handle, as if he might bolt at any second. His jeans were too short, revealing mismatched socks, one blue, one grey, and his jacket hung loose on his small frame like he was wearing his older brother's clothes. But it was his eyes that made Regina's chest tighten. Old eyes in a young face, the kind that came from knowing hunger as a familiar companion. "Sit anywhere you like, honey," Regina called softly, her voice gentler than usual. She watched as the boy's gaze swept the diner, taking in the truckers at the counter, the construction crew sharing coffee and jokes at table 3, the way morning light streamed through windows that needed washing but still managed to make everything look hopeful. He chose the corner booth, sliding into the worn vinyl seat with careful movements, as if he was afraid of taking up too much space in the world. His small hands emerged from his jacket pockets, clutching a handful of coins, quarters, dimes, nickels, and pennies that caught the light like scattered promises. Regina approached with a menu, but before she could speak, the boy was already counting. His lips moved silently as his fingers sorted the change into neat piles on the scarred formica table. Once, twice, a third time, his shoulders dropping a little lower with each count. "What can I get you, sweetheart?" Regina asked, sliding into the booth across from him. The movement was automatic, instinctive, the same way she'd sit with her younger cousins when they were scared or hurt. The boy looked up, and Regina saw her own childhood reflected in his expression. The careful calculation of hope against reality, the practiced art of wanting less so disappointment wouldn't cut so deep. "How much is?" His voice was barely above a whisper. He cleared his throat and tried again, stronger this time. "How much is just eggs? Like just scrambled eggs?" Regina's heart clenched. She knew without looking at the menu that his carefully counted coins wouldn't cover even the cheapest item. But she also knew something else, something Grandma Rose had taught her during their own lean years. Sometimes the only prayer that matters is the one you answer yourself. "Well," Regina said, her voice taking on a conspiratorial tone, "it's funny you should ask about eggs. See, our cook Charlie made way too many this morning, and if we don't serve them, they'll just go to waste. Manager says we have to give them away." She leaned forward like she was sharing a secret. "You'd actually be doing us a favor by taking them off our hands." The boy's eyes widened, a flicker of something dangerous, hope, dancing across his features. "Really?" "Cross my heart," Regina said, making the gesture over her chest where her grandmother's cross lay hidden beneath her uniform. "But here's the thing. Eggs by themselves are kind of lonely, don't you think? They need some toast to keep them company. And Charlie made too much bacon too." She winked. "Kitchen is having a real overproduction problem today." Across the street, Alex watched this exchange through the diner's window with the intensity of someone witnessing a miracle. He'd seen the boy enter, had noticed the careful way he'd counted his change, and now he was watching the waitress, Regina, he'd heard another customer call her, perform an act of such pure, unconscious kindness that it made his chest feel tight. She wasn't performing for anyone. There were no cameras, no audience, no tax benefits or charitable write-offs. She was simply seeing a hungry child and responding with her heart, even though Alex could tell from the way she moved, from the careful way she'd counted her own tips earlier, that she was probably sacrificing her own lunch money to make this happen. His phone buzzed again, a text from his assistant about the morning's board meeting. The acquisition of Technova Industries would be finalized today, a deal worth $847 million that would make his company the largest software conglomerate on the West Coast. But watching Regina carefully arrange a full breakfast in front of a grateful 8-year-old, those millions felt like play money, monopoly bills that bought impressive things but never touched the soul. Alex found himself leaning forward in his seat, his breath fogging the Tesla's window as he watched the boy take his first bite. The kid's eyes closed for just a moment, a tiny prayer of gratitude, and when they opened, they were bright with tears that he quickly wiped away with the back of his sleeve. "Tastes good?" Regina asked, and even from across the street, Alex could see the gentle smile on her face. The boy nodded vigorously, his mouth too full to speak. Then, swallowing carefully, he said, "My sister, she's hungry too. Could I take some back to her?" Without hesitation, Regina stood up. "Of course you can, baby. Let me get Charlie to pack something up real nice." Alex watched her disappear into the kitchen, and something inside his chest cracked open. Not painfully, but like the first thaw of spring, when ice that's held solid for months finally surrenders to warmth. When had he last felt moved by anything real? When had he last witnessed genuine goodness that expected nothing in return? His adoptive mother had tried to teach him about charity, about giving back, but it had always felt calculated, strategic. Board positions on non-profit committees, galas where the wealthy gathered to congratulate themselves on their generosity, checks written to organizations they'd never visit to help people they'd never meet. But this, watching Regina pack up extra food she couldn't afford to give away, seeing her slip what looked like a $20 bill into the bag when she thought no one was looking. This was something else entirely. This was love in action, grace in motion, the kind of unconscious goodness that had been beaten out of him by years of boardrooms and betrayals. Regina returned with a brown bag that bulged with more food than any reasonable leftover surplus could account for. She handed it to the boy with a smile that transformed her tired features into something luminous. "Now you make sure your sister gets her share, okay? And you come back tomorrow if you need to. Charlie's probably going to overcook again." The boy clutched the bag to his chest like it contained treasure, which, Alex realized, it did. "Thank you," he whispered, and the words carried more genuine gratitude than Alex had heard in all his years of corporate thank yous and obligatory appreciation. As the boy headed for the door, Alex felt an overwhelming urge to follow him, to somehow be part of this circle of grace that Regina had created. But he remained frozen in his leather seat, watching through glass like a child with his face pressed against a bakery window, seeing sweetness he didn't know how to taste. The diner's bell chimed again as the boy left, and Regina stood for a moment in the sudden quiet, her hand resting on the table where he'd sat. Alex saw her shoulders rise and fall with a deep breath, saw her touch the cross at her throat, a gesture so small and private it felt like witnessing a prayer. In that moment, something shifted inside Alex's carefully guarded heart. For the first time in decades, he felt genuinely hungry, not for food, but for the kind of connection that Regina had just offered a stranger. He wanted to know what it felt like to give without calculating the return, to love without measuring the risk, to be needed for something more than his bank account. His hand moved to the door handle of his Tesla, trembling slightly. Across the street, Regina was clearing the table, moving with the same quiet grace she'd shown all morning. But now Alex could see what he'd missed before. The way she moved like someone carrying an invisible weight, the careful economy of her gestures that spoke of someone who couldn't afford to waste anything, not even energy. The $20 bill she'd slipped into the boy's bag represented more than money to her. It was groceries, medication for her grandmother, bus fare to her second job. And she'd given it away without a second thought, without any guarantee it would ever return to her. Alex's world of contracts and collateral, of secured investments and calculated risks, suddenly seemed not just empty, but actively hostile to the kind of faith Regina had just demonstrated. She'd invested in hope itself, with no portfolio manager, no insurance policy, no exit strategy, except the simple belief that love given freely somehow multiplies in ways that spreadsheets could never track. The bell chimed again as Regina moved toward the kitchen, and Alex knew he was about to make a decision that would change everything. The question wasn't whether he could afford to walk into that diner. He could buy the entire building without thinking twice. The question was whether he could afford not to, whether he could drive away from this window into authentic humanity and still call himself alive. His reflection in the darkened glass looked back at him with those beautiful but empty eyes his ex-wife had described. But for the first time in years, Alex thought he saw something else flickering behind them, a hunger that all his billions had never been able to satisfy, and a desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to learn how to be truly generous. The silence that followed the boy's departure felt different, heavier, charged with the weight of witnessed grace. Regina stood at table 4, her cloth making slow circles on the already clean surface, but her mind was racing through calculations that had nothing to do with the diner's morning rush. $20, the exact amount she'd planned to spend on Grandma Rose's blood pressure medication. The same 20 that was now walking out the door in a brown paper bag, heading toward a little girl who probably hadn't eaten since yesterday. Regina's stomach chose that moment to remind her that she'd skipped breakfast again, the familiar gnawing ache that had become her constant companion. "You okay, honey?" Dolores, the morning shift supervisor, appeared at Regina's elbow with a concerned frown. At 63, Dolores had seen enough struggling waitresses to recognize the signs. "You look a little pale." "I'm fine," Regina replied automatically, the same lie she'd been telling for months. But her hands trembled slightly as she folded the cleaning cloth, betraying the anxiety that was building in her chest like a storm front. Dolores studied her with knowing eyes. That was real sweet, what you did for that boy. But sweetness don't pay rent, if you catch my meaning. Regina's jaw tightened. She did catch the meaning, more clearly than she wanted to. The eviction notice at home seemed to pulse with malicious energy, counting down her remaining days like a time bomb. 3 days until she'd be on the street. 3 days to come up with money she'd just given away to a child whose name she didn't even know. Sometimes doing right don't feel smart, Regina murmured, more to herself than to Dolores. Honey, I've been watching you give away your tips for months now. Free coffee refills that you pay for yourself. Accidentally bringing extra biscuits to the construction boys when their order runs short. Your heart's in the right place, but hearts don't keep the lights on. Regina wanted to argue, wanted to say that some things mattered more than keeping score, but the words caught in her throat. Because Dolores was right, and because the rational part of her mind, the part that had learned arithmetic from eviction notices and hunger pangs, was already calculating how many shifts she'd need to work just to break even. The diner's bell chimed again, and Regina looked up to see Mr. Patterson, one of her regulars, settling into his usual booth. Coffee black, wheat toast dry, reading glasses perched on his nose while he studied the morning paper like it held the secrets of the universe. A good tipper, thank God. Maybe she could make up some of what she'd lost. But even as she moved toward Mr. Patterson's table, coffee pot in hand, Regina felt a weight in her chest that had nothing to do with money. It was the weight of watching her own kindness like a bank account, measuring generosity in dollars and cents instead of letting it flow freely from her heart. When had helping others become a luxury she couldn't afford? Across the street, Alex sat in his Tesla with his hand frozen on the door handle, caught between two equally impossible choices. Go inside and do what? Introduce himself as the billionaire who'd been stalking her workplace for 6 months. Offer to pay for the boy's meal after she'd already handled it with such quiet dignity. Write her a check and destroy the very authenticity that had moved him in the first place. His phone buzzed insistently. His assistant again, probably wondering where he was for the Technova meeting. Alex ignored it, but the sound broke whatever spell had been holding him. He released the door handle and slumped back into the leather seat, running his hands through his hair. What was he thinking? He belonged to a different species than the woman in that diner. She lived in a world where $20 mattered, where kindness came with real cost, where generosity required actual sacrifice. His world was one of tax-deductible donations and charitable galas where the wealthy performed goodness for each other's benefit. If he walked into that diner, what then? Even if he ordered coffee and tried to make conversation, his watch probably cost more than she made in 6 months. His shoes, his clothes, the casual way he'd leave $100 tip. It would all scream his otherness, his fundamental disconnection from her reality. And yet, Alex found himself remembering a different diner, 30 years ago. He'd been about the same age as the boy who'd just left, sitting in a red vinyl booth with holes patched by electrical tape, counting coins that never seemed to add up to enough. The waitress then had been an older woman named Betty, with grey roots showing through bottle-blonde hair and hands that shook slightly when she poured coffee. Betty had seen him counting those coins, seen the hunger in his 8-year-old eyes, and she'd done exactly what Regina had just done. Made up a story about too much food, about helping her out by eating what would otherwise go to waste. The lies had been transparent even to a child, but they'd preserved his dignity while filling his stomach. That meal had stayed with him through years of foster homes and scholarship applications, through building his first company and selling it for millions, through every subsequent success that had taken him further from that hungry little boy. But watching Regina with her hungry child, Alex realized he'd never really left that booth. He'd just built higher walls around it, padded it with luxury until he couldn't feel the vinyl cracks anymore. The difference was that Betty's kindness had launched him toward something better. She'd given him hope, literally fed his dreams. But Regina's kindness seemed to be costing her everything, pulling her deeper into the very poverty he'd escaped. Alex's chest tightened with a familiar anger. The rage that had fueled his climb from nothing to everything. The fury at a world that punished goodness and rewarded selfishness. Regina deserved better. She deserved to live in a world where kindness wasn't a luxury, where helping others didn't mean sacrificing yourself. But how could he help without destroying what made her special? How could he give without taking away her agency, her dignity, her right to choose her own path? Every solution he could think of felt patronizing. Another rich man playing savior to the grateful poor. His phone rang again, the sound sharp in the car's silence. This time it was the call he'd been avoiding all morning. The board meeting was starting without him. Technova's executives were probably sitting around the conference table, wondering where their buyer had disappeared to. Nearly $1 billion in motion, waiting for his signature. Alex stared at the phone until it stopped ringing, then at the diner, where Regina was serving coffee to an elderly man with gentle efficiency. She was already moving on, compartmentalizing her kindness like a luxury she'd allowed herself once and couldn't afford again. But Alex could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she glanced toward the kitchen like she was calculating costs, measuring hope against reality. He started the Tesla's engine, the electric motor humming to life with barely a whisper. The smart thing would be to drive away, to return to his world of abstractions and acquisitions, to let this moment be what it was, a beautiful glimpse into authentic humanity that he could treasure in memory, but never actually touch. But as Alex put the car in drive, he caught his reflection in the rearview mirror. Those beautiful but empty eyes stared back at him, and for the first time in years, he saw not just emptiness but active poverty. He was starving in the middle of abundance, dying of thirst while drowning in money. Regina had given away $20 she couldn't spare because a child was hungry. Alex had $20 billion and couldn't figure out how to connect with another human being without his wealth contaminating the interaction. Who was really the poor one in this equation? The Tesla rolled forward, carrying him away from the diner toward a world where everything had a price, but nothing had real value. But even as the distance grew, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that he was leaving behind the most important thing he'd ever witnessed. Regina's gift to that boy wasn't just food. It was proof that authentic goodness still existed in the world. And for the first time since childhood, Alex Richardson felt genuinely poor. 3 days later, Alex found himself parked outside Mel's diner again. But this time it wasn't insomnia that had driven him there. It was something more dangerous. Curiosity laced with an aching need he couldn't quite name. The Technova deal had closed successfully, $847 million richer on paper. But the victory felt hollow, like winning a game he no longer wanted to play. Through the morning haze, he could see Regina moving between tables with the same quiet efficiency, but something was different. Her movements seemed more careful, more deliberate, as if she was conserving energy she couldn't spare. When she smiled at customers, it took a fraction longer to reach her eyes. Alex's phone had been buzzing all morning with congratulatory messages about the acquisition, interview requests from financial magazines, invitations to celebration dinners at restaurants where the wine cost more than most people's monthly salary. He'd ignored them all, choosing instead to sit in a parking lot watching a woman serve coffee to people who actually needed it. The diner's bell chimed at exactly 7:41 a.m., and Alex's breath caught in his throat. The same boy from 3 days ago pushed through the door, but this time he wasn't alone. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, followed behind him, her small hand gripping the back of his jacket like an anchor. She was thin in the way that children shouldn't be, her eyes too large for her face, her movements quick and bird-like, as if she expected to be shooed away at any moment. Alex watched Regina's face transform when she saw them. The practiced politeness melted into something warmer, more personal, as if these children belonged to her somehow. She guided them to the same corner booth, sliding in across from them with the natural grace of someone who understood that sometimes the most important conversations happened at eye level. From his vantage point across the street, Alex couldn't hear their words, but he could read the story in their gestures. The boy explaining something to Regina, his sister nodding solemnly beside him. Regina listening with the complete attention that adults usually reserved for other adults, treating their words like they mattered because they did. Then something shifted. Regina's posture straightened, and even from across the street, Alex could see the conflict playing out on her face. She glanced toward the kitchen, toward the cash register, toward the reality of numbers that didn't care about hungry children. Her hand moved instinctively to her throat, touching that cross necklace in what Alex was beginning to recognize as a gesture of prayer or desperate hope. This time, she stood up and walked to the counter where Dolores was tallying receipts. Their conversation was brief but intense, Regina speaking with quiet urgency, Dolores shaking her head with the expression of someone who'd had this discussion before. Alex saw Regina pull out her phone, checking something that made her shoulders slump. Bank balance, he realized. She was checking her bank balance. Regina returned to the booth, and Alex could see her explaining something to the children. Whatever she said made the boy's face fall, made his sister's eyes fill with tears she tried to hide. They started to stand, to leave, but Regina caught the boy's hand and said something that made them sit back down. Alex's hands clenched on the steering wheel. He was watching poverty make decisions that kindness wanted to veto, watching good people forced to choose between their hearts and their survival. Everything in him screamed to intervene, to stride into that diner and solve the problem with money that meant nothing to him, but everything to them. But he remembered the look on Regina's face 3 days ago, the dignity in her deception about leftover food, the way she'd preserved the boy's pride while feeding his hunger. If Alex charged in with his wealth blazing, he'd steal that dignity from all of them, reduce Regina's choice to charity and the children's need to pity. The decision made itself. Alex turned off the Tesla's engine, straightened his tie, and walked across the street with the measured pace of a man approaching either salvation or disaster. The diner's bell announced his entrance with its cheerful chime, and every head in the place turned toward him. Construction workers pausing mid-conversation, truckers glancing up from their eggs, Dolores looking him up and down with the sharp eye of someone who could spot trouble from 3 counties away. But it was Regina's expression that stopped him cold. Recognition flickered across her features, not of his identity, but of his otherness. She knew quality when she saw it, from his Italian leather shoes to his perfectly tailored suit, from his Patek Philippe watch to the way he moved like someone who'd never had to count coins for a meal. "Sit any way you like," Regina said, her voice carefully neutral. Professional distance, wrapped around vulnerability, like armor. Alex chose a booth near the window, close enough to the children to seem coincidental, far enough away to avoid appearing predatory. As Regina approached with a menu and coffee pot, he caught a whiff of her perfume. Not expensive, but clean and warm, like vanilla and hope. "Coffee to start?" she asked, already turning over his cup with practiced efficiency. "Please." Alex's voice came out rougher than intended. Up close, he could see the weariness around her eyes, the way her uniform had been mended at the shoulder seam with tiny, careful stitches. "And maybe you could recommend something? I'm new to this place." Regina's smile was polite but guarded. "Everything's good here. Depends on what you're in the mood for." Before Alex could respond, a small voice piped up from the corner booth. "She makes the best eggs," the boy announced solemnly. "And she's really nice to kids." "Thomas," Regina said gently, but there was affection in the mild warning. "It's true," the little girl added, her voice barely above a whisper, but fierce with loyalty. "She's the nicest lady in the whole world." Alex felt something crack open in his chest at the simple faith in those young voices. "Well, that's quite a recommendation," he said, looking directly at Regina. The nicest lady in the whole world must make exceptional eggs. A flush crept up Regina's neck, and for the first time since he'd entered, her professional mask slipped slightly. "Kids say the sweetest things," she murmured. "Sometimes kids see things adults miss," Alex replied, his eyes holding hers for a moment longer than necessary. The silence stretched between them, charged with possibilities neither was ready to name. Then Dolores's voice cut through the moment like a cleaver through hope. "Regina, honey, could you help me with something in the kitchen?" Regina's gaze snapped away from Alex's, the spell broken. "Of course. I'll be right back to take your order," she told Alex, her voice carefully neutral again. As she walked away, Alex heard her whisper something to the children, saw the boy nod gravely and his sister's face light up with cautious joy. When Regina returned from the kitchen 2 minutes later, she was carrying 2 plates loaded with pancakes, eggs, and bacon. Far more food than 2 small children could eat. "Dolores says Charlie overcooked again," Regina announced to the children, but her eyes met Alex's briefly over their heads. There was something in her expression, gratitude mixed with confusion, as if she couldn't quite understand why a stranger in an expensive suit would care about her small act of kindness. Alex understood then that this was his invitation into her world, not through grand gestures or dramatic reveals, but through the quiet conspiracy of shared compassion. Regina had found a way to feed the children without compromising their dignity or her own, and somehow, his presence had made it possible. As the children dug into their unexpected feast, chattering happily about school and friends and the small joys that children find in dark times, Regina returned to Alex's table with fresh coffee and a question in her eyes. "So," she said, settling into the seat across from him with a naturalness that surprised them both, "what brings a man in a $1,000 suit to Mel's diner on a Tuesday morning?" Alex looked at her, really looked, and saw past the uniform and the weariness to the strength underneath, the kind of beauty that had nothing to do with makeup or money, and everything to do with a heart that chose kindness even when it hurt. "Maybe I was looking for the nicest lady in the whole world," he said simply. And for the first time in 3 days, Regina's smile reached all the way to her eyes. Over the next hour, their conversation unfolded like a slow dance. Tentative steps forward, careful retreats, moments of surprising grace when their rhythms aligned. Alex ordered eggs that he barely touched, too captivated by the way Regina's face animated when she talked about the children who frequented the diner, the regulars who'd become like family, the small kindnesses that made each day bearable. "Thomas and Lily, that's the little girl. They live with their grandmother about 6 blocks from here," Regina explained, refilling his coffee cup for the 3rd time. "Grandma Betty works nights cleaning office buildings, sleeps during the day. Sometimes the kids get hungry before she wakes up." "Betty," Alex repeated, the name hitting him like a physical blow. His coffee cup rattled against the saucer as he set it down. Does she have grey hair?" "Worn blonde." Regina's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You know Betty Martinez?" Alex's throat felt tight. "A long time ago. Different last name then." He stared out the window, seeing not the morning street, but a diner 3 states away, 30 years in the past. "She probably doesn't remember me." "Betty remembers everyone," Regina said softly, something in Alex's expression making her lean forward. "She has this way of seeing people, really seeing them. Says every person who walks through a door is carrying their own story, and most of those stories are heavier than they look." The irony wasn't lost on Alex. That Betty, the waitress who'd first shown him what grace looked like, was now the grandmother of the children who'd led him back to Regina. The universe seemed to be weaving patterns he was just beginning to recognize. "She's right about the heavy stories," Alex said, his voice barely above a whisper. Regina studied his face with the same careful attention she'd given the hungry children. "Want to talk about it?" Something in her tone, gentle but not pushy, curious but not invasive, broke through defenses Alex had spent decades building. Maybe it was the way the morning light caught the gold flecks in her brown eyes, or the fact that she'd just witnessed him care about something other than money. Maybe it was simply that he'd been carrying his story alone for so long that the weight was finally becoming unbearable. I was 8 years old the first time I sat in a booth like this one, counting change and hoping it would be enough, Alex began, his eyes fixed on the coffee cooling in his cup. Foster kid, bounced around from family to family. Most of them were decent people, but decent doesn't always mean warm, you know? Regina nodded, her hand unconsciously moving to her throat where her grandmother's cross lay hidden. There was this diner in Detroit, looked a lot like this place, actually. Red vinyl booths, cracked ceiling, coffee that could strip paint. I'd saved up quarters from returning bottles, thought I had enough for a hamburger. Alex's laugh held no humor. Turned out I was about $2 short. What happened? There was this waitress named Betty, different Betty, but she had the same eyes as yours. Kind eyes. Alex looked up, meeting Regina's gaze directly. She told me the cook had made an extra burger by mistake, asked if I'd help her out by eating it. Even brought me fries and a chocolate shake. Said they were about to go bad. Regina's breath caught. She saw you. She saw me, Alex confirmed. And more than that, she let me keep my dignity while she fed my hunger. I was just some throwaway kid to everyone else, but she treated me like I mattered. You did matter. The simple certainty in Regina's voice nearly undid him. I thought about her for years after. Wondered if she knew how much that moment meant to me, how it was the first time someone had shown me genuine kindness without expecting anything back. Did you ever see her again? Alex shook his head. Different foster home the next week. Then another and another. By the time I was 18, I'd lived in 14 different places. Never stayed anywhere long enough to form real attachments. Regina was quiet for a long moment, processing not just his words, but the careful way he held himself. Like someone who'd learned early that safety was temporary and love was conditional. Is that why you started your company? She asked finally. To never be that vulnerable again? Alex's eyes widened slightly. She'd cut straight to the heart of it with surgical precision. Among other reasons, yeah. Financial security was important to me. And now I have more money than I know what to do with. And I still feel like that 8-year-old kid sometimes. Hungry for something I can't buy. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Regina reached across the table, not quite touching his hand, but close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. Money can't fill every kind of emptiness, she said softly. No, it can't. Alex turned his palm up on the table, an invitation she could accept or ignore. What about you? What's your story, Regina? She hesitated, her fingers hovering inches from his. The diner hummed around them with the comfortable noise of morning conversation, but their corner felt separate, insulated by honesty. My parents died when I was 12, Regina said finally, her voice steady but careful. Car accident on I-95, coming back from my school play. I was supposed to be in that car, but I'd gotten sick at the last minute. Stayed home with Grandma Rose. Alex's heart clenched at the pain hidden behind her matter-of-fact tone. Grandma Rose raised me after that. She was a school cafeteria worker, made sure every kid got fed, whether they could pay or not. Used to bring home leftover food for the families in our neighborhood who were struggling. Regina's smile was soft with memory. She taught me that kindness isn't about what you can afford to give. It's about what you can't afford not to give. She sounds like an amazing woman. She is. Was. Regina's composure wavered slightly. She's in assisted care now. Alzheimer's. Most days she doesn't remember my name, but she still asks me to take care of the children every time I visit. Even when she's lost in her own mind, she's worried about feeding hungry kids. Alex understood then why Regina gave away money she didn't have, why she couldn't walk past a hungry child without acting. It wasn't just kindness, It was legacy, the living embodiment of love passed down through generations. The medication she needs, Regina continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, it's not covered by insurance. Experimental treatment that might slow the progression, help her hold on to herself a little longer. It costs. She shook her head. More than I make in 6 months. Regina, I'm not telling you this for pity, she said quickly, finally placing her hand over his. The contact sent electricity up Alex's arm. I'm telling you because you asked about my story, and this is it. I work 3 jobs, and it's still not enough. I give away food I can't afford, because Grandma Rose taught me that hungry children don't care about your bank balance. And some days I wonder if I'm honoring her memory or failing her completely. Alex stared down at their joined hands. His pale and soft from a life of privilege, hers darker and marked with the small scars that came from honest work. You're not failing her, he said with quiet conviction. You're living exactly the way she taught you to live. Even when it means I might lose everything? Especially then. Alex turned his hand to capture hers properly, their fingers interlacing with surprising naturalness. Because that's when kindness costs the most, and means the most. From the corner booth, Thomas's voice piped up. Miss Regina, can we have some more orange juice? Of course, baby, Regina called back, but she didn't immediately move to get it. Instead, she looked at Alex with eyes that held a lifetime of questions, and the beginning of something that might have been hope. I should probably... Wait, Alex said, his grip on her hand tightening slightly. There's something else. About Betty, the children's grandmother. I think she might remember me after all. And if she does, I think I know why those kids found their way to you. Regina's eyebrows furrowed in confusion. What do you mean? Alex took a deep breath, knowing that what he was about to say would change everything between them. My name isn't just Alex. It's Alexander Richardson. And 30 years ago, a waitress named Betty gave a hungry foster kid named Alex the first real kindness he'd ever known. Understanding dawned slowly across Regina's features, followed by something that might have been wonder. She sent them to you, Regina whispered. Somehow she knew. Alex nodded, feeling the weight of cosmic coincidence or divine intervention. He wasn't sure which, and was beginning to think it didn't matter. Maybe some stories are meant to come full circle. In the corner booth, Lily was giggling at something Thomas had said, their bellies full and their faces bright with the uncomplicated joy of childhood. And at table 6, 2 adults sat holding hands across decades of pain, finally understanding that some hungers could only be satisfied by feeding each other. The afternoon shift change brought a natural pause to the diner's rhythm, and with it, an unexpected invitation from Regina that surprised them both. My break starts in 10 minutes, she said, still not quite believing the words as they left her mouth. There's a park across the street. If you're not in a hurry. Alex looked at his watch, a gesture that had become automatic after years of scheduled meetings and calculated minutes. He had a conference call with investors in Tokyo, a lunch meeting with his legal team, 17 emails marked urgent, waiting in his inbox. But sitting here with Regina, watching her trace patterns on the table with her finger while she talked, those obligations felt like obligations to someone else's life. I'm not in a hurry, he said. The park was small and tired-looking, the kind of forgotten green space that existed between more important things. A few weathered benches faced a playground where Thomas and Lily had convinced Regina to let them burn off their pancake energy. Their laughter carried on the spring air, like music neither adult had realized they'd been missing. Regina sat on the bench with her legs tucked under her, having kicked off her work shoes to let her feet breathe. The simple gesture, so natural, so unconsciously feminine, made Alex's chest tight with something he was afraid to name. She'd also let down her hair from its practical ponytail, and it caught the dappled sunlight filtering through the oak trees above them. Tell me something nobody knows about you, Regina said suddenly, her eyes fixed on the children as they raced each other to the swings. Alex was quiet for so long that she started to think he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of confession. I talk to her sometimes. Betty, the waitress from when I was 8. When I'm making big decisions, or when I can't sleep, I imagine what she'd say. He laughed self-consciously. Sounds crazy, I know. It doesn't sound crazy at all. Regina turned to face him more fully. What does she tell you? Usually? That I'm overthinking things. That kindness isn't complicated, even when everything else is. Alex met her eyes. She would have liked you. Actually, she would have loved you. The simplicity of the statement hung between them, loaded with implications neither was quite ready to examine. Regina felt heat creep up her neck, but she didn't look away. What about you? Alex asked. Something nobody knows? Regina was quiet for a moment, watching Lily help Thomas reach the monkey bars. I wanted to be a teacher once. Had a scholarship to state, education major all lined up. When my parents died, I could have still gone. Grandma Rose insisted I should. But you didn't. I couldn't leave her. She'd already lost her son, my father, and she was trying to hold herself together for me. How could I abandon her for my dreams? Regina's smile was soft but tinged with old grief. Some sacrifices don't feel like sacrifices when you love someone enough. Alex understood the weight of that choice in ways that surprised him. He'd spent his adult life accumulating everything. Money, power, options, because he'd never wanted to be trapped by circumstances again. But Regina had willingly chosen limitation out of love, and somehow that made her infinitely more powerful than he'd ever been. Do you ever regret it? He asked gently. Some days, Regina admitted. When I'm tired, or when the bills are piling up, or when I see my old classmates' Facebook posts about their students and their summer breaks and their normal lives. She paused, her eyes following the children's play. But then I remember that every child I've fed, every person I've served with kindness, that's teaching too, isn't it? It's the most important kind of teaching. Their conversation was interrupted by Thomas running over, his face flushed with excitement. Miss Regina, look what Lily found. He opened his small palm to reveal a dandelion that had gone to seed, its white wishes trembling in the breeze. Lily followed behind him, her eyes bright with the magic that children find in ordinary things. It's a wish flower, Lily announced solemnly. You make a wish and blow, and maybe it comes true. Regina accepted the dandelion with the same reverence she might have shown a rare orchid. What should I wish for, baby girl? Something good, Thomas said seriously. Something that makes you happy. Alex watched Regina close her eyes, her lips curving into a smile that was half hope, half prayer. The dandelion seeds caught the afternoon light as she blew gently, sending them dancing on the air like tiny parachutes carrying dreams. Your turn, mister, Lily said, turning to Alex with the fearless confidence of childhood. You need wishes too. Before Alex could protest, Thomas was pressing another dandelion into his hands. Big people forget to make wishes, the boy explained with 8-year-old wisdom. That's why they get sad sometimes. Alex looked at the fragile sphere in his palm, then at Regina's expectant face, then at 2 children who believed absolutely in the power of seeds and wind and hope. When was the last time he'd wished for anything that money couldn't buy? He closed his eyes and made a wish so specific and startling in its simplicity that it took his breath away. When he opened them, the seeds were gone, and Regina was watching him with an expression of gentle curiosity. What did you wish for? She asked. If I tell you, it won't come true, Alex said, but his smile was soft with possibility. That's silly, Lily declared. Sometimes wishes come true faster when you share them. The children ran back to the playground, leaving the adults alone with the weight of unspoken hopes and the growing awareness that something precious was taking root between them. I wished for time, Regina said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Alex turned to look at her, noting the way the afternoon light caught the gold in her eyes, The way her uniform had wrinkled in ways that made her look beautifully, perfectly human. Time for what? Time to figure out what's happening here. She gestured between them, her cheeks coloring slightly. Time to see if this feeling is real, or if I'm just imagining it, because you're the first person in years who's looked at me like I'm more than just someone to take orders from. Alex's heart hammered against his ribs. You're not imagining it. How can you be sure? Because I wished for the same thing. He reached for her hand, his fingers finding hers with the natural ease that had surprised them both earlier. Time to know you. Time to understand how someone like you exists in a world that seems designed to break people like us. People like us? People who've been hungry. People who know what it feels like to be overlooked, to be temporary in everyone else's life. Alex's thumb traced across her knuckles. People who give too much because we remember what it felt like to have too little. Regina stared at their joined hands, at the way his expensive watch looked strange against her work-worn skin, at the impossibility of this moment existing in her carefully structured life of survival and service. Alex, she said softly, I need you to know something. I'm not a project for you to fix. I'm not some charity case who needs rescuing. I know that. Do you? Because I've seen how people with money look at people like me. Like we're noble for being poor. Like our struggles are inspiring from a safe distance. Alex was quiet for a long moment, understanding that this was a test he couldn't afford to fail. You're right, and I can't promise I won't stumble, that I won't say the wrong thing or assume too much. But I can promise you this. I don't see you as a project or a cause. I see you as the most real person I've met in 20 years. What does that mean? It means when you smile, I believe it. When you laugh, it doesn't sound calculated. When you choose kindness over self-preservation, it's not because you're performing goodness for an audience. It's just who you are. Alex paused, gathering courage. And being around you makes me remember who I used to be before I learned to measure everything in profits and losses. The playground sounds seemed to fade as Regina studied his face, searching for deception or manipulation, and finding only raw honesty that made her chest feel tight. I'm scared, she admitted. Of what? Of letting myself believe this is real. Of caring about someone whose world is so different from mine that we might as well be different species. She looked at him directly. Of what happens when you remember that you're a billionaire and I'm a waitress who can't even pay her rent. Alex lifted their joined hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles that sent warmth racing up her arm. Then let's just be Alex and Regina for now. Two people who found each other by accident and are trying to figure out what that means. From the playground, Thomas called out, Miss Regina, watch me go down the big slide. I'm watching, baby, she called back, but her eyes never left Alex's face. Just Alex and Regina, she repeated softly, testing the words like a prayer. Just Alex and Regina, he confirmed. And for the first time in longer than either could remember, that felt like enough. The magic lasted exactly 47 hours. Regina was wiping down table 3 when she saw the black sedan pull up outside Mel's diner, its tinted windows and sleek lines as out of place as a diamond in a junkyard. She'd been floating through her shifts, replaying every word of their conversation in the park, every touch, every moment when Alex had looked at her like she was the answer to questions he'd been asking his whole life. The sedan's door opened, and a woman in a tailored business suit stepped out, blonde, polished, carrying herself with the kind of confidence that came from never having to count change for a meal. She surveyed the diner through the window with the analytical gaze of someone conducting a business assessment, her expression unreadable behind designer sunglasses. Regina's stomach dropped even before the woman entered, even before she heard the perfectly modulated voice asking Dolores, "Excuse me, I'm looking for Regina Martinez. I understand she works here." "That's me," Regina said, her voice steadier than she felt. Up close, the woman was even more intimidating. Everything about her screamed money and power, and the kind of education that opened doors Regina had never even known existed. "My name is Catherine Walsh, Mr. Richardson's executive assistant." The woman's smile was professional, practiced, empty of warmth. "I wonder if we might have a word?" Regina's hands stilled on the table she'd been cleaning. "Mr. Richardson." "Not Alex, Mr. Richardson." The formality hit her like cold water. "About what?" Catherine glanced around the diner with barely concealed disdain, her gaze lingering on the cracked vinyl booths and the coffee stains on the floor that no amount of scrubbing could quite remove. "Perhaps somewhere more private?" "This is fine," Regina said, crossing her arms over her chest. Whatever this was, she wouldn't be ashamed of where she worked. Catherine's smile tightened slightly. "Very well." She reached into her briefcase and withdrew a manila envelope. "Mr. Richardson asked me to give you this." Regina stared at the envelope like it might bite her. "What is it?" "A check," Catherine said matter-of-factly. "For $50,000. The words hit Regina like a physical blow. Around them, the diner's morning rhythm continued. Coffee pouring, conversations murmuring, the grill sizzling. But she felt suddenly isolated, as if she were viewing the scene through thick glass. "I don't understand." "Mr. Richardson was quite moved by your situation," Catherine continued, her tone suggesting she was reciting from a script. "He wanted to help with your grandmother's medical expenses." Regina's face burned with shame and fury and something else. Betrayal so sharp it made her chest ache. "He told you about Grandma Rose?" "Mr. Richardson is a very generous man. He's helped many people in similar circumstances." Similar circumstances. The phrase landed like a slap. Regina looked at the envelope in Catherine's manicured hand and saw herself as Alex must see her. Another charity case. Another poor person whose struggles made for touching dinner party anecdotes. "Many people," Regina repeated hollowly. "Oh yes. There was the single mother in Portland whose son needed surgery, the veteran in Miami who was about to lose his home, the teacher in Chicago whose husband had cancer." Catherine recited the list with the efficiency of someone reading inventory. "Mr. Richardson believes in giving back to the community." Each example was another knife twist. Regina wasn't special. She wasn't the woman who'd awakened something real in Alex Richardson. She was just the latest recipient of his guilt-driven philanthropy. "I see." Regina's voice came out flat, emotionless. "And what exactly does Mr. Richardson expect in return for his generosity?" Catherine's eyebrows rose slightly. "I'm sorry. Nobody gives away $50,000 without expecting something back. What does he want?" For the first time, Catherine looked genuinely confused. "Nothing. Mr. Richardson doesn't expect anything in return. This is simply a charitable donation." Charitable donation. The words hung in the air like poison gas, choking off everything beautiful that had grown between them in the past 2 days. "Where is he?" Regina asked. "Mr. Richardson is in meetings all day. He'll be flying to New York this evening for a series of investor presentations." Flying to New York. Moving on to his real life. The one where waitresses with hard luck stories were footnotes in quarterly giving reports. "You can tell Mr. Richardson," Regina said, her voice gaining strength with each word, "that I don't need his charity." Catherine blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "You heard me. Take your check and your pity and get out of my diner." "Miss Martinez, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "No," Regina said, louder now, loud enough that Dolores and several customers turned to look. "There's been no misunderstanding. Your boss saw a poor waitress with a sad story and decided to write a check to make himself feel better. Well, congratulations. You can tell him his good deed for the month is complete." Catherine's professional composure cracked slightly. "Mr. Richardson specifically instructed me to ensure you understood this comes with no strings attached." "Because that makes it better?" Regina laughed, the sound bitter and raw. "Because that makes me feel less like a beggar he threw coins to from his limo window? Miss Martinez, get out." Regina's voice was deadly quiet now. Get out of my diner, and tell your boss that some things can't be fixed with money. Catherine stood there for a moment, clearly out of her depth in a situation that couldn't be resolved with contracts or negotiations. Finally, she placed the envelope on the table Regina had been cleaning. The offer stands, she said stiffly. Should you reconsider? She left as efficiently as she'd arrived, the bell above the door chiming her exit with cheerful oblivion. Regina stared at the envelope lying on the scarred formica like evidence of a crime. $50,000. Enough to pay for Grandma Rose's medication for a year. Enough to keep her apartment, to stop working 3 jobs, to breathe for the first time in months. All she had to do was accept that she'd been played for a fool, that every word Alex had spoken in the park was part of an elaborate performance of wealthy benevolence. Regina, honey? Dolores appeared at her elbow, concern creasing her weathered features. You okay? Regina laughed again, the sound dangerously close to hysteria. You know what the worst part is, Dolores? For 47 hours, I actually believed I was special. She picked up the envelope, held it for a moment, then walked to the trash can behind the counter and dropped it in with the coffee grounds and breakfast scraps. Regina, Dolores gasped. That was a check for. I know what it was. Regina tied her apron with sharp, angry movements. And I know what it made me. Her phone buzzed, a text message. Against her better judgment, she looked. Regina, I know Catherine came by. Can we please talk? This isn't what you think. Alex. She stared at the message for a long moment, her thumb hovering over the reply button. So many things she wanted to say, so many accusations and hurt feelings and shattered dreams she wanted to hurl at him like stones. Instead, she typed 4 words, "Don't contact me again." Then she blocked his number and went back to work, serving coffee and eggs and carrying on with the life she'd been living before Alexander Richardson had walked through her door with his expensive suit and his beautiful lies about seeing her as more than a project to fix. But even as she moved through the familiar motions of her job, Regina couldn't stop thinking about the dandelion wishes they'd made in the park, about the way he'd held her hand like it was precious, about the look in his eyes when he'd said she was the most real person he'd met in 20 years. Had any of it been real? Or had it all been just another part of his charitable performance? The questions followed her through the rest of her shift like ghosts, and by the time she finally went home to her empty apartment and her unpaid bills, Regina Martinez had built walls around her heart that she swore no amount of money could ever break down again. In the trash can at Mel's diner, a check for $50,000 lay buried under the day's refuse, a symbol of everything good that had been poisoned by the assumption that love could be purchased and dignity could be bought. Alex Richardson had built his empire on the principle that every problem had a solution, every obstacle had a price, every no was simply the starting point for negotiation. But sitting in his penthouse office 43 floors above the city, staring at his phone screen that showed message blocked for the 7th time in 3 days, he was confronting the first problem his billions couldn't solve. The New York investor meetings had been a disaster. He'd flown across the country to secure funding for a revolutionary green energy initiative, a deal worth $1.2 billion that would cement his company's position as an industry leader. Instead, he'd spent 3 days distracted, hollow-eyed, going through the motions while his mind remained in a small diner where a woman named Regina had thrown his good intentions back in his face. The investors had noticed. Questions about his commitment to the project, concerns about his focus, polite suggestions that perhaps he needed some time to recalibrate. Alex Richardson, the man who'd never met a room he couldn't command or a deal he couldn't close, had watched $1.2 billion walk away because he couldn't stop thinking about the way Regina's face had crumpled when she'd seen that check. Mr. Richardson? Catherine Walsh appeared in his doorway, tablet in hand, expression carefully neutral. The Henderson Group has agreed to a follow-up meeting next week, but they want guarantees about Fire yourself, Alex said quietly. Catherine blinked. I'm sorry. Alex looked up from his phone for the first time in an hour. You're fired, Catherine. Clean out your office. Sir, if this is about the Martinez situation, I followed your instructions exactly. No, Alex said, standing slowly. You followed what you thought were my instructions. You took something private and personal and turned it into a business transaction. Catherine's professional composure faltered. You asked me to deliver financial assistance to someone in need. That's what I did. I asked you to help someone I care about. You made her feel like a charity case. Alex's voice was quiet, but Catherine had worked for him long enough to recognize the danger in that tone. There's a difference. Mr. Richardson, Regina Martinez is a waitress. Regina Martinez is the woman I'm in love with. Alex cut her off, the words surprising them both with their raw honesty. And you made her think I saw her as just another item on my charitable giving spreadsheet. Catherine stared at him as if he'd announced his intention to colonize Mars. Sir, with all due respect, you've known her for less than a week. I've known her for 30 years, Alex said, thinking of Betty and Dandelion Wishes and the way Regina's eyes lit up when she talked about the children she served. I just didn't know her name until last week. He walked to the window, looking down at the city sprawling below. Millions of people living their lives in buildings that looked like toys from this height. Somewhere down there, Regina was probably starting her evening shift at the diner, moving between tables with that quiet grace, carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, and still finding ways to be kind. Pack up your things, Catherine. Jennifer from HR will handle your severance. After Catherine left, Alex sat alone in his office with its million-dollar view and its museum-quality art, surrounded by the trappings of success that suddenly felt like the decorations on a very expensive tomb. He pulled out his personal phone, not the company device, but the old smartphone he'd kept for years, and scrolled to a contact he hadn't called in 6 months. She answered on the third ring. Alex. Sweetie, is everything okay? Hi, Mom, he said, and at 42 years old, his voice still cracked slightly on the word. Margaret Richardson, not his biological mother, but the woman who'd taken in a damaged 12-year-old and somehow convinced him he was worth loving, had always been able to hear his pain through phone lines and across time zones. You sound terrible, honey. What's wrong? Alex closed his eyes, feeling suddenly like that lost boy again. I think I screwed up the best thing that ever happened to me. Tell me. So he did. All of it. The diner, the hungry children, Regina's kindness, their conversation in the park, Catherine's disastrous visit, the blocked phone number that felt like a door slamming on his heart. Margaret was quiet for a long moment after he finished. Do you love her? Yes. The answer came without hesitation. Then why are you sitting in your office feeling sorry for yourself instead of fighting for her? Because she doesn't want to see me. She made that pretty clear. Alex. His mother's voice carried the patient tone she'd used when he was 16 and convinced the world was ending because some girl had rejected him for prom. When you were a little boy and you got hurt, what did you do? I hid, he admitted. And what did I tell you about hiding? Alex smiled despite his misery. That the people worth having won't let you hide forever. Exactly. So if Regina is worth having, and from everything you've told me, she is, then you don't get to hide in your tower like some fairy tale villain. You get down there, and you show her who you really are. What if she won't listen? Then you keep showing her until she does. But Alex, Margaret's voice grew serious. You have to be willing to meet her where she is. Not bring her up to your level, but get down on hers. Can you do that? Alex looked around his office. At the mahogany desk that cost more than most people's cars, at the awards and photos and symbols of everything he'd built. It had all been about climbing higher, getting further from the hungry boy he'd once been. But maybe it was time to remember that boy, to honor him instead of running from him. Yeah, Mom. I think I can. The next morning, Alex Richardson did something he hadn't done in 25 years. He took public transportation. The bus to Regina's neighborhood was crowded and smelled like exhaust and human lives being lived, and it was the most real thing he'd experienced in decades. He dressed carefully, not in his usual armor of designer suits, but in jeans and a simple sweater, the kind of clothes he'd worn before money became his primary language. In his pocket was a small velvet box, and in his heart was a plan that would either save everything or destroy what little chance he had left. Mel's diner looked different at 6 a.m., smaller somehow, more fragile, like a ship floating in the morning darkness. Through the window, he could see Regina moving between tables, and his chest tightened with longing and terror in equal measure. But Alex didn't go inside. Instead, he walked to the alley behind the diner, where he knew Regina took her breaks, where the dumpster sat next to a single wooden crate that served as a makeshift chair. And there he waited, like a man preparing for either redemption or judgment, knowing that what happened next would determine whether love could survive the weight of everything they'd built and broken between them. At 7:15 a.m., the diner's back door opened, and Regina stepped into the alley with a cigarette in her hand. A habit Alex hadn't known she had, probably something that came out only under extreme stress. She saw him immediately, and her whole body went rigid. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was flat, emotionless. Alex stood slowly, his hands empty and visible. "I came to apologize. I told you not to contact me. You blocked my number. You didn't say anything about showing up in person." Regina took a long drag from her cigarette, and Alex could see the exhaustion etched in every line of her face. "Go home, Alex. Back to your real life." "This is my real life," he said quietly. "You are my real life. Don't." The word came out sharp, desperate. "Don't you dare stand there and lie to me again. I never lied to you." "No. Then what was that check supposed to be?" "Your way of saying thanks for the entertainment. Payment for services rendered." Alex felt each word like a physical blow, but he'd expected this anger, this pain. He'd earned it. "The check was me being an idiot," he said simply. "It was me falling back on the only way I know how to help people, throwing money at problems and hoping they go away. Well, congratulations. The problem is gone. I'm gone. Are you?" Alex took a step closer, and Regina didn't retreat. "Because if you were really gone, you wouldn't be this angry. You'd just be indifferent." Regina's hands were shaking slightly as she took another drag. "You don't know anything about me. I know you're terrified," Alex said softly. "I know you're scared of caring about someone who might leave, because everyone you've ever loved has either died or disappeared. I know you work 3 jobs and still give away money you can't spare because your grandmother taught you that hungry children matter more than your own comfort. I know you've never let anyone take care of you because you learned early that the only person you can really count on is yourself." Regina's cigarette had burned down to her fingers, but she didn't seem to notice. "Stop. I know you dream about teaching, about having summers off and a classroom full of kids who look at you like you hung the moon. I know you talk to your grandmother every night even though she doesn't remember your name, because you remember hers." Alex's voice dropped to a whisper. "And I know you felt something real when we were in that park, something that scared you, because it was the first time in your life you let yourself imagine that someone might actually stay." Tears were streaming down Regina's face now, and she was making no effort to hide them. "Why are you doing this to me?" "Because I'm in love with you," Alex said, the words hanging in the air between them like a bridge she could either cross or burn. "Not because you're a project or a charity case or some noble poor person who makes me feel good about myself. Because when I'm with you, I remember who I used to be before I became successful. Because you see hungry children and you feed them, not because it's tax deductible, but because it's right. Because you make me want to be the man that 8-year-old boy dreamed of becoming, not the one he settled for." Regina dropped her cigarette and ground it under her heel with more force than necessary. "You want to know what I think? I think you're bored. I think your rich life got too empty, and you came slumming for some authentic experience. And when you got tired of playing poor, you'd go back to your penthouse, and I'd just be another story to tell at parties. Alex reached into his pocket and pulled out the small velvet box, holding it between them like an offering. Then explain this. Regina stared at the box with terror and longing warring in her eyes. What is that? Open it. Alex, I can't. Please. Just look. With trembling fingers, Regina took the box and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in white satin, was not a ring but a small, delicate charm. A tiny golden diner, complete with miniature stools and a counter, hanging from a simple chain. It's not an engagement ring, Alex said quickly, seeing the panic in her eyes. It's a promise. A promise that this, he gestured between them, is real. That you matter to me not because of what I can do for you, but because of who you are. Regina lifted the charm from the box, holding it up to catch the morning light. The craftsmanship was exquisite, clearly expensive, but somehow it didn't feel like money. It felt like memory, like a moment captured in gold. I had it made by a jeweler in Detroit, Alex continued, near the diner where Betty fed me 30 years ago. I wanted to give you something that honored where we met, but more than that, I wanted you to have something that proved I pay attention to your world, not the other way around. Regina's tears were falling faster now. I threw your check away. Good. You should have. $50,000, Alex. I threw away $50,000 because I was too proud to. Because you have integrity, Alex corrected firmly. Because you won't be bought or saved or fixed by anyone, including me. Because you're the strongest person I've ever met, and you'd rather struggle with your dignity intact than be comfortable without it. My grandmother needs that medication. Then we'll find another way to get it. Not my way, not me writing checks and making your problems disappear. Our way. Together. Regina closed her fingers around the charm, holding it tight enough that Alex could see her knuckles go white. I'm scared, Alex. Of what? Of believing you. Of letting myself trust this, and then having it disappear like everything else good in my life. Alex took a step closer, close enough that he could smell her vanilla perfume mixed with cigarette smoke and the coffee that permeated everything at the diner. I can't promise I won't make mistakes, he said quietly. I can't promise I won't sometimes handle things wrong, or say the wrong thing, or fail to understand your world. But I can promise you this. I will never, ever see you as anything less than my equal. I will never, ever treat your love like a commodity I can purchase. And I will never, ever leave you unless you tell me to go. Regina looked up at him, and for the first time in 4 days, Alex saw hope flickering behind the pain in her eyes. What are you asking me, Alex? I'm asking you to take a chance on us. I'm asking you to let me prove that what we have is real. I'm asking you. Alex's voice broke slightly. I'm asking you not to give up on us before we've really started. The alley was quiet except for the distant sound of traffic and the muffled noise from the diner's kitchen. Regina stood there holding a tiny golden diner in her palm, and Alex stood there holding his heart in his hands, both of them balanced on the knife's edge between hope and heartbreak. One condition, Regina said finally. Anything. If we do this, if we try this, we do it as equals. Not you helping me, not me being grateful to you. Partners. Partners, Alex agreed. And Alex? Yeah. Regina looked down at the charm one more time, then back up at his face. The next time you want to help with something, you ask me first. You don't send your assistant with a check. You ask me, and we figure it out together. Deal. Regina fastened the chain around her neck, the tiny diner settling against her collarbone, right next to her grandmother's cross. 2 symbols of faith, 2 reminders of the power of kindness, 2 pieces of her heart made visible. Now, she said, taking a step toward him, are you going to kiss me, or are we going to stand in this alley all day talking about our feelings? Alex's answer was to cup her face in his hands and kiss her with all the desperate love and relief and gratitude that had been building in his chest since the moment he'd realized he'd lost her. Regina kissed him back with equal fervor, for days of pain and longing and fear pouring out of both of them into this one perfect moment of reconnection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Regina smiled at him. The first real smile he'd seen since Catherine had walked into the diner. "So what now?" she asked. "Now," Alex said, resting his forehead against hers, "we go make some wishes come true. Starting with breakfast for 2 hungry kids who are probably already looking for you. And then we figure out the rest as we go, together." And as they walked hand in hand toward the diner's back door, both of them knew that this was just the beginning of their real story. Not the fairy tale version where money solved everything, but the messy, complicated, beautiful human version where love required work and trust was earned one day at a time. But it was their story, and that made all the difference. 6 months later, the morning rush at Mel's diner looked much the same as it always had. Truckers hunched over coffee cups, construction workers sharing jokes over eggs and bacon, the comfortable chaos of people starting their days with food and fellowship. But if you looked closely, you might notice small changes that spoke of hope taking root in unexpected places. The corner booth where Thomas and Lily used to count coins now hosted a different kind of counting. Regina sat with a small group of children, helping them with homework while they ate breakfast that had been paid for not by charity, but by the Hungry Hearts program, an initiative that had grown from a simple idea into something that fed 43 children every morning across 6 neighborhood diners. "Miss Regina," Thomas said, looking up from his math worksheet with the kind of confidence that came from having a full stomach and a secure future, "I got all the multiplication problems right." "I knew you would, smart boy," Regina said, ruffling his hair with the easy affection of someone who'd helped raise him. "What about you, Lily? How's that book report coming?" Lily, now 7 and more chatty than she'd been during those hungry days, held up a hand-drawn picture of a princess feeding birds. "It's about a princess who shares her bread with all the hungry animals in the forest, and then when she gets in trouble, they all come help her." "Sounds like a smart princess," Alex said, sliding into the booth next to Regina with 2 coffee cups and a smile that still made her heart skip. "One who understands that kindness comes back to you." The easy way he interacted with the children, never condescending, always genuinely interested in their lives, had been one of the first signs that Regina's leap of faith 6 months ago had been the right choice. Alex had kept his promise about meeting her where she was, about being partners rather than savior and saved. The Hungry Hearts program had been their first real collaboration, born from late-night conversations in Regina's apartment about how to help hungry children without creating dependence or destroying dignity. Alex had provided the initial funding, but Regina had designed the program, hired the staff, and insisted on the policies that made it work. Families contributed what they could, whether money or volunteer hours or simply showing up with gratitude. No one was a charity case. Everyone was a community member. "Mr. Alex," Thomas said, using the title the children had settled on after rejecting Mr. Richardson as too fancy. "Are you coming to my soccer game Saturday?" "Wouldn't miss it, champ. Regina promised to teach me the rules." "She doesn't know the rules either," Lily announced with 7-year-old honesty. "She just cheers really loud when you kick the ball." Alex and Regina exchanged a look of shared amusement that spoke of inside jokes and comfortable intimacy, the kind that developed when 2 people had weathered storms and chosen to keep choosing each other. "Speaking of Saturday," Regina said, pulling a folded paper from her apron pocket, "I got my test results back." Alex's entire body went still. For the past 4 months, Regina had been taking night classes at the community college, working toward her teaching degree with the determination of someone making up for lost time. The tests she was referring to would determine whether she qualified for the state university's accelerated teaching program. a chance to finish her degree in 2 years instead of 4. And? Alex asked, though Regina's smile already told him the answer. I passed everything. Not just passed, aced. Regina's voice carried wonder, as if she still couldn't quite believe it herself. They're offering me a full scholarship. The diner erupted in cheers from the children, who'd been following Regina's academic journey with the invested interest of people who understood that her dreams were connected to theirs. Thomas and Lily both launched themselves at her for hugs, chattering about how she was going to be the best teacher ever. Alex sat quietly through the celebration, watching the woman he loved accept congratulations with the grace of someone who'd learned she was worthy of good things. When the children settled back into their homework, he reached across the table and took her hand. I'm proud of you, he said simply. We did this together, Regina corrected, her thumb tracing over the simple engagement ring that had replaced the golden diner charm on her left hand 2 months ago. The scholarship, the program, all of it. We're partners, remember? It was true in ways that still amazed Alex. When Regina had decided to pursue teaching, he'd wanted to pay for her education outright. Old habits died hard, but she'd insisted on earning the scholarship herself. Instead, he'd contributed in ways that honored their partnership, driving her to classes when her car broke down, studying with her at the diner's quiet tables, helping her navigate the administrative maze of college bureaucracy without ever making her feel incapable. The balance they'd found wasn't perfect. They still occasionally stumbled over the vast differences in their backgrounds. But it was real. Alex had moved out of his penthouse and into a modest apartment 6 blocks from the diner, close enough that Regina could walk to work, but not so close that he was hovering. He still ran his company, still made more money than most people could imagine, but now he came home to someone who asked about his day and meant it, someone who cared more about whether he was happy than whether he was successful. Miss Regina, a new voice interrupted their moment. They looked up to see Maria Santos, a waitress from the diner across town, approaching with a shy smile. I hope you don't mind me bothering you during breakfast, but I heard about your program, and I was wondering. Regina immediately gestured to an empty chair. Of course, sit down. Tell me what's on your mind. As Maria explained about the hungry children in her neighborhood, about families struggling to put food on the table, Alex watched Regina listen with the complete attention she gave to everyone who needed help. This was how the Hungry Hearts program had grown, not through corporate expansion plans or marketing strategies, but through word of mouth, through one caring person connecting with another. By the end of their conversation, Maria was wiping away tears of relief and gratitude, and Regina was already pulling out her phone to connect her with the program coordinator, who would help set up a satellite location. Thank you, Maria whispered as she stood to leave. You have no idea what this means. Actually, Regina said with a smile that encompassed Alex and the children and the whole chaotic, beautiful morning. I think I do. That evening, after the dinner rush had ended and the diner had settled into its quiet nighttime rhythm, Alex and Regina sat in their favorite booth. The same one where Thomas had once counted coins, sharing a piece of Dolores's apple pie and planning their future. So, Alex said, stealing a bite of pie from her fork, teacher Regina Martinez Richardson has a nice ring to it. Regina laughed, the sound as warm as the first day he'd heard it. We're not married yet, Mr. Presumptuous. 6 more months, Alex reminded her, referring to their wedding date, deliberately chosen for a year after their first meeting, a full circle of seasons and growth and learning to trust each other. 6 more months, Regina agreed. Think you'll be ready to be married to a teacher who makes $30,000 a year and gets her hands dirty with playground duty? I think I'll be ready to be married to you, Alex said seriously. Everything else is just details. Through the diner's window, they could see the city settling into evening. Lights coming on in apartment windows, people heading home from work, the daily rhythm of ordinary lives being lived with ordinary dreams and ordinary love. It wasn't glamorous or dramatic, but it was real, and Alex had learned that real was worth more than all the excitement money could buy. Alex, Regina's voice was soft, thoughtful. Yeah. Do you ever think about that first morning? When Thomas came in with his coins. Alex considered the question. Every day. Why? I was so tired that morning. So defeated. I almost didn't help him. Can you believe that? I almost let that baby leave hungry because I was worried about $20. Regina shook her head at the memory. If I had, we never would have met. We would have met, Alex said with certainty. Maybe not that day, maybe not in that way, but we would have found each other. Some things are meant to be. You really believe that? I believe that kindness calls to kindness, Alex said, echoing something Betty had told him all those years ago. I believe that when you live with an open heart, the universe finds ways to fill it. I believe that you and I were always going to find each other because we were both looking for the same thing. Which was a place to belong, someone to feed, and someone to feed us back. Regina was quiet for a moment, her fingers playing with her engagement ring. You know what the best part is? Tell me. We get to keep doing this. Not just the romance, not just the wedding and the happily ever after. We get to keep feeding hungry children together. We get to keep building something that matters. Alex reached across the table and took both her hands in his. Regina Martinez, you are the most extraordinary woman I've ever known. Just Regina, she said, echoing their words from that first day in the park. And just Alex. Just Regina and just Alex, he agreed. For the rest of our lives. Outside, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky, and somewhere in the city, Thomas and Lily were probably getting ready for bed with full bellies and bright futures. Somewhere, Maria Santos was calling her own community about starting a feeding program. Somewhere, hungry children would wake up tomorrow knowing there were people who cared about their empty stomachs and their dreams. And in a small diner that had become the heart of something beautiful and bigger than itself, two people who had learned to love against all odds sat planning a future built on the radical idea that kindness multiplies when it's shared, that love grows stronger when it's given freely, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is see another person's hunger and decide to feed it. The diner's neon sign flickered in the window, still missing that "So it read die." But Alex and Regina had learned that some kinds of dying were actually birth. The death of loneliness, the death of pride that prevented connection, the death of the idea that love could be earned or purchased or deserved. They had died to their old selves and been reborn as something new. Partners in the ancient art of feeding the hungry, comforters of the lonely, believers in the power of small acts of grace to change the world one heart at a time. And in the morning, they would wake up and do it all again, because that's what love looked like when it was real. Not a fairy tale ending, but a daily choice to see each other's needs and meet them, to build something larger than themselves, to prove that in a world that often felt cold and hungry, there was still such a thing as grace.